there's a lot of fun stuff that we're going to do today. First, we're going to show 50 years of Asian pop culture in America, and then it's going to be followed by a Q&A that is going to be answered mostly by Eric Nakamura. And for those of you who don't know who Eric is, he is the publisher of Giant Robot. And then the the movie is then going to be followed by, the Q&A is going to be followed by a refreshment hosted by Beard Papa. So please go out and enjoy yourself and then mingle with people. And then that's going to be followed by the application workshop, integrating elements of pop culture into marketing efforts. And then we're going to have Pika Pika workshop. Again, as you could see, this is a very intimate environment. So really, we're among friends, basically. So please enjoy yourselves. And tomorrow, you're going to see a lot of this repeated. But that's why I think that it would be really great if you can take advantage of the fact that you do have a very intimate setting, and then please ask any questions, embarrassing or rude to Eric. And the good ones we'll answer, but him, the difficult ones could go to him. So with that, I'm going to ask, do you want to say anything before that, or? Okay.
Prehistoric monster the Japanese call Godzilla has just walked up.
Oh, thanks for watching it. I guess you have any questions? I think that was one of the little things that people were wondering if there was going to have any questions about it, but there was just like a lot of stuff that just got thrown in your way, so I'm not sure. Maybe not.
I'll ask the question.
Go
So
ahead.
the video proved that there's been a lot of influence of Asian Americans over the years. Why hasn't Hollywood really then allowed us to actually break into that scene in terms of like our images and the types of characters we play and stuff like that?
I think it's actually getting better. If we're talking about like Asian American faces that way, I think it's gotten a lot better than it was just 5 years ago. I'm seeing more directors for sure who are Asian American who are actually getting like distribution deals and stuff like that. And I think with that, you're going to get more Asian American faces for sure. Asian faces seem like they've had no problem at all just breaking into Hollywood, but yeah, Asian Americans definitely trailing behind. I used to think there was a big talent problem, like it just wasn't quite up to par, but actually it's starting to even out. I'm starting to see a lot better Asian American performances in films, and both male and female, and I think that's been a really good thing, or a good sign. It's better than it was, let's put it that way, but it's still got a ways to go. That's just how I see it anyway.
There's one reference to Vincent Chen in the movie. Obviously, like one of the commentators said, watershed moments in history. Asian Americans always sort of seen as perpetual foreigners, So is the embracing of Asian pop culture sort of seen as things from Asia, or like how does that work vis-a-vis us who are here as Asian Americans?
Well, I think for me, and what I believe anyway, with even in this film, like one of the questions was, well, there's a lot of Asian American stuff, and that's not Asian exactly. But I think there's a tie-in. I mean, when I think about like Vincent Chin, well, the fact was they thought he was Japanese, but he was a Chinese American guy. But they thought he was, those dudes thought he was just straight up from Japan. So I think there's definitely a hand-in-hand thing. I mean, an image of an Asian American person definitely changes as Asian things change in America. Like when you see something that's Asian pop culture, for example, an Asian American, perceptions of an Asian American will change as well. I think it all goes hand in hand. It's something that I kind of tossed over for a while. I wasn't quite sure, like, was that true? But then I realized, well, definitely. I mean, if you think of Sulu, he's an Asian American, Japanese American guy in the 60s, for example, with Star Trek. I mean, how many people decided to eat Japanese food as a result? You know, seeing Sulu on there going, oh, I think Japanese stuff isn't really that freaky. And there was no, I don't think they really made a big, differentiation between what's an Asian American and what was from Asia. So I think they're definitely tied, even from back then in the 60s to all the way to now. That's just what I think anyway.
I have a question. Do you happen to know, I know that there's a cliche, they all look alike or you all look the same, and I don't hear that really about like the Latino community necessarily or the Black American community, but do you happen to know where that phrase was? It sounds almost like somebody must have said it publicly at some point, and then it was funny and.
That must have been ages ago, because I remember hearing that from, I think when I was a kid in the 70s. So I think,
I'd be really curious to know, like,
I mean,
I don't know if anybody knows.
isn't there like even a website, alllookthesame.com or something that's, it's like there's some kind of like, some jokey websites like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure where that started, but I think, I'm gonna guess it's at least the 70s, maybe even before. I mean, it could be World War II era for Asian Americans in World War II. That time could be. My guess it'd probably be military.
Yeah.
If they go overseas and they were fighting in Asia somewhere, I'm sure there was some like bad cliches made. Maybe. Oh, another one.
Okay, so
Please do.
so we can look back and we can see how Asian Americans have influenced over the last 50 years. Where should marketers look now to see how Asian Americans are going to influence the market 5, 10 years out?
Are you talking about like Asian Americans or just Asian popular culture?
I guess Asian pop culture. I think the reason why I'm asking is a lot of times like marketers with like with already small budgets to begin with, when they think about multicultural marketing, they're going to hit like the Black market, the Latino market, and then by the time they get to the Asian market, it's always like we don't have enough money.
Right.
So what's the reverse in that, and seeing how 5% of the population, looking at the trends from them, we can see how we're going to reach a broader.
That's a perfect question, because we're probably going to discuss that stuff with after you eat your beard papa and all that stuff. We'll be discussing stuff like that. Maybe Ryan can explain a little.
I think one thing just to keep in mind as a marketer is right now we see multicultural marketing as a media buy driven sort of thing. It's an allotment of your media budget, you're going to adjust your creative, you're either going to translate it or apply or try and nuance it so that it applies to a certain demographic. But I think what's going to start happening is it's going to be less about media and just more about culture and how a brand adapts to culture, how you can use certain cultural elements to reach people. So it's not going to happen quickly, but I think, since culture in America is starting to disseminate and kind of blend at a pretty rapid rate because of social media, it's going to be about finding just, for lack of a better word, leverage points. So we're going to go over things today like Korean soap operas. That may be on the surface a good way to speak to Koreans, but then you learn that 91% of the people who watch Korean soap operas in America aren't Korean. So, I think as marketers, it's just about keeping an open mind and being curious about the world in which your consumer lives in and trying to look at it in a sort of media agnostic perspective. So that's something that we're going to kind of work on.
Also, for example, we have the Pika Pika workshop later today and tomorrow. If you think about that too, those guys are, they're from Japan and they're doing that painting with light stuff. Obviously, you've seen the Sprint commercials, who basically, taken what they do and, turned it into pop culture commercials, in America. But that's really a concept. The way that was presented anyway in that Sprint commercial is a concept done by these people from Japan. So, although you can't really tell just from painting with light, but, just something like that was definitely looked at for a while by people here, and they were definitely checking out things in Asia. So, what's going to be your next campaign? Well, it became the national campaign for Sprint, for example, for better or worse. But that's an example. It's like we have them, for example, booked here 6 months ago for this event, and then all of a sudden this commercials rolled out, and we're like, wow, look at the influence that these guys actually had on the world of advertising and marketing. And so we're glad to have the kind of originators of it here, and it's kind of cool. But that's an example too, I think, of how it can work without it really being overtly Asian. Those who know, but it's just a really interesting medium that got kind of adopted here. So you should try it later too. It's really fun. Any others? Oh, there's one more.
I always compared Japanese anime to African American or black hip hop or Latino reggaeton. But do you think American audience in general know that anime belong to an Asian culture? But do we, as a community, did enough to let American audience or consumers know all this here, rich culture, belong to Asia? Or they basically adopted so well that nobody realized an Asian culture?
I think they know it's Asian for sure. Of the people I know anyway, for sure it is. But I think part of it is I think it's definitely so adopted. Even in the Midwest, I mean, if you go to like a Barnes and Nobles or something, people are reading manga, and it's being
In English.
yeah, they're also in English, and it's like one of the biggest sellers, you know, of books. And it's being created. Also, there's manga being created by Americans that are non-Asian at all, and being published here too. And it's completely separate from what's in Asia. So it's just the style and it's an aesthetic. And maybe Anne can explain a little bit. She worked at Vertical
I
Books.
used to publish manga, and I know that one thing was if an American male would buy line on a manga, it wouldn't sell as well. So I think it's not just that Americans know it's Asian. If it's not extra Asian, you know, even if it's an Asian American who happens to have a fully Asian name, as long as it's not Jason Weinberger or whatever, like they'll buy it, you know, and they're, you know, I know a woman who does manga style comics, very capable of creating that Asian look, but her books don't sell because her name is not Asian. Similarly, you know, the most successful youth imprints of manga are kept in what they're calling 100% authentic Japanese style, which is not flipped. It's still read right to left. And it's those books categorically sell better. Yeah, I mean, the same writer group will have two different lines of comics, and you know, the one that looks more like original Japanese or Korean manga sells better because it's exotic, the format. And you know, as the market gets older, if you want your reader to be an older group, they want something more American. So with the kids, at least, with the youth market, every sale has shown that the more Asian it is, the better it does. And again, as the audience gets older, they prefer things that are more American.
Do you know why is it?
No. I know.
Is it because the younger generation is more open or more receptive to things
I
of
think
different cultures?
there's a couple things. One is, I know that for in prose fiction and non-manga, just regular text fiction, marketers going for the youth market typically assign age markings that are older than their target audience. So if they want 16-year-olds to read a book, they'll say this is for 18-year-olds. If they want 13-year-olds to read it, they say it's for 16-year-olds. And the reason why, or you know, the featured protagonists, if you want junior high school kids to read books, the protagonists are in high school. So the idea being kids are getting into something that they're too young to be doing, you know, like it's like when girls want to put on lipstick really young, and it's because they know they're too young, but I'm not articulating myself very well, but you know, you market to young kids by making them feel older, and I think that's the idea. Yeah, so I think that's the same thing with, you know, Asian products. If they're privy to something that seems, you know, exclusive, foreign, or that maybe adults don't really understand, it makes them feel like they're part of an exclusive club. I think that's a big part of it.
Another question?
Yes, I remember that the scene in the video says some Americans have never seen the movie, but they adopt the toys afterwards. Do we have any, or do you have any study, you know, around the 50 years of Asian culture integrated into American culture, who will be the trendsetters, who will be the early adopter, or not necessarily the people, but maybe some media will be, early adopting this Asian pop culture and then bring this culture into the United States, bring this culture into the mainstream cultures?
Wow, what a tough question. The answer to that's tough. I like to think over time, I mean, it's like always pushed by small groups of people, right? That's an very Asian pop culture type of system. It's always pushed by a very small group of people. Sometimes it's the hardcore fan because, for example, anime, even in the 80s, animation in the 80s from Japan, for example, it was always the small, like exclusive little club. Same with, stuff like collecting Japanese toys, which became like a really huge industry right now, it's a really huge industry right now, but all the way to like, even in the 90s, like Justin Lin mentioned, Hong Kong films. It was like a very small exclusive group that, well, now it's like huge, right? The Asian film market is huge in America, but in the 90s, for example, it was just small fans. So to me, it's always been pushed by the fans. It's little by little now so becoming adopted into everything that you can't even tell when things are, Asian pop culture related in media. Sometimes you're like, oh, I could see it. And I'm like, oh, that's totally ripped off from something else, but only the fan might know. And in general, it's just being kind of pushed out there. So I kind of see it that way. It's just little groups always pushing it, and then when it gets to the right place, it really matures and ripens and either gets exploited or just really gets pushed out there.
Well, I think it's true. It's always little groups push first, but the question is who are those little groups?
Oh, geeks. I mean, even if you go to like an anime expo, it's like, wow, it's one of the, like, I remember going more than 5 years ago, it was so much smaller than it is now, but the crazy fan base that they'll dress up in costume, like not just 10%, maybe it's like 50% or something. They're dressing up in costume. They're so into it that they want to be that character. And I look at that and I'm thinking, wow, that still hasn't really arrived as like a really big commercial thing. It's still kind of, to me, still like looked at as, you're being a geek. It hasn't really been adopted yet in any way. So I still think that's kind of the groups. It's always these like small geek pockets, right? If it's like a group playing games at like a, video game type of cafe, computer cafe type of thing. I mean, that's still like, that's not everywhere yet, for example, but they're there, doing it. And it's just small groups of people. So I still see it as just totally a nerdy thing.
Yeah, but do you think it's funny some animation has been pushed so much by the geeks, but they are not become pop culture yet? But Hello Kitty definitely not pushed by geeks.
What's that?
So
Hello Kitty?
Definitely not pushed by geeks, but right now they are.
Oh, right now it's Target. It's Target sells Hello Kitty. It's huge, but I mean, even in Hello Kitty in the 70s or later 70s, I remember if I bought it, I was looked at like weird because I'm a guy buying Hello Kitty. But I remember I bought Hello Kitty stuff, right? And I remember other guys buying it. It was always like this little secret thing. So of course, at that time it was very geeky, but it's become a big licensed product in America. But I still think even that one started in 75 or 76 in America. It was, it was still very in the know. You had to go to an Asian neighborhood to find it. It wasn't everywhere yet.
I think Hello Kitty became popular because of Paris Hilton.
It probably that took it to different levels for sure.
Bring it to a different level because of the fashion designer. There's like fashion designer from London and also fashion designer here that adopt them all, and then somehow to me like Asian culture once they adopt by American become popular. And it seems like it's harder, like what you said, like it's harder for us as Asian to bring Asian pop culture and make it big in America.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying. I mean, go ahead.
No. I'm thinking that it might be a good segue in terms of having Ryan come up and do kind of like an integration of pop culture into a marketing effort, because it's not necessarily that, there can be kind of a collaboration, and I think what Ryan's going to be presenting kind of presents that and kind of demonstrates what can be done as well too. But like I said, this is a very intimate environment and very informal. So if you have any questions, Eric's going to be around, so please pose questions to him. But Ryan, do you want to just go up and start your?
Yeah, actually, just to respond to that though, I think you're right. And again, to your question, it's always been driven by very grassroots, small collections of geeks, But in the 80s and to a certain extent the 90s, you might have had like 2 or 3 kids in one high school that were into this, and that's all they had was each other. And there weren't really a lot of venues for them to meet other people who were into it. And they had to be pretty creative about how they were accessing that information because, you know, the internet hadn't really risen at that point. Now you have those 2 or 3 people per high school, but they can hive together. So you see communities online of kids with the same interests, so cosplay, like Eric was talking about. You know, if you used to dress up like Sailor Moon, you were probably the only kid in your high school that did it, and you probably felt like a pretty big reject, but you did it anyway because that's what you like to do. Now you can find sites where there's thousands of kids who are coming online, talking about it, meeting at conventions, they're having these sort of social outlets. So, you know, to your point, it's always been a very small percentage of the population that drives it, but now that small percentage collects together, they hive together, and that's an opportunity for you to find an audience.
Also, that small group of people, they grew up, and some were in, you know, positions of some power where they're able to like use what they grew up with and put it into pop culture. I mean, for example, I do a magazine, right? Giant Robot Magazine. We started in the '90s, pretty much before the internet boom. But it's an example. It's like it was a fan-based magazine, and there were people all over the country writing letters. This is before email. They would write us letters saying, "Wow, I live in Oklahoma, but I grew up with Ultraman." You know, and I grew up with Hello Kitty, and I really love it, and I can't believe there's other people there. And they didn't really, there was no network set up yet, really. So you realize that over time, you know, the internet really did connect people. But at the same time, I think it's grown exponentially since then, because we just see it that way. It's just how it's completely blended. Because, you know, the Hello Kitty and Target was never thought that was possible. Even in the '90s, never thought that was going to happen. So I think that's just how it's grown. Which is good. I'm glad, you know, technology helped it grow because it's very fitting.
Go ahead, you go ahead. It's just a quick aside. I don't think we can discount gender in this either. I know Hello Kitty and anime are the two dichotomies, the things we're not pitting, but they're comparable and totally distinct. You know, another huge population that's infiltrated the internet are women who are at home with kids, and they are fueling the Japanese craft book market. Again, I'm just speaking from a publishing background, but you know, manga is really popular, but I mean, those craft books are ridiculous. Kawaii stuff, I mean, it's 20 and 30-something-year-old women at home on the internet in their, DIY crafts blogs. That community is huge, and there's a lot of Asian stuff in there too. But you know, again, that is a sort of deep culture. We would never call it that because they're mothers, but you know, that it's the same. It holds the same structure. It's just a different gender and a different age group.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. I think like in previous decades or whatever, whenever pop culture has been marketed towards the American community, it's been Asian Americans trying to assimilate, I guess, and so it's more, you know, you'll see like Japanese models or whatever dye their hair blonde in hopes of just connecting better with an American audience. And in the last, you know, decade or two, I think it's either Shaishido or Shuomura. It was recently a Yahoo News article about how they're saying that Japanese women are beautiful and they should, you know, like maintain their look and how they are towards the American community. So in terms of marketing, like what direction do you think it's gonna go in? Do you think pop culture is gonna continue in this, like Asians should represent themselves and just be very, you know, like try to just be Asian, or would they, I don't know.
I remember, I think it was in the 90s or 80s, 90s, God, maybe it was the 90s, earlier 90s. Anyway, so I remember there was a time when Japan, it was looked at as a place where they were copying everything that it was American. They wanted American Levi's and were paying top dollar for the rare Levi's, right? It was like a big thing. They were copying just design all around. But I think now, for example, I think a lot of Americans and whatnot are copying the tastemakers in Japan. You know, they're looking at things that they're doing. I mean, you'll see some of it here later, but they're definitely influenced from it. And I think there's so many things here that are influenced from just a very few people in Asia, and it's all come here. But I think that's kind of the coolest thing is I've seen a total switch from the influence going one way to very much either sharing or going the other way. And I think that's kind of a really interesting thing because, and I think that of course that also was fueled through technology and internet and stuff like that. The blogs just push everything so fast. I think that's kind of something that even we pay attention to and we've noticed. So I think that's kind of like what you'll see is it is definitely, when we're talking about like Asians being natural or whatever, I think that's kind of, I mean, it's just, you can look at even books published in America, the fruits books, or there's just a lot of street photography books from, let's say, Tokyo, certain neighborhoods, and it's like, yeah, you know, some of them have bleached blonde hair, they're funky, but some of them aren't. They look they're just very natural looking. And they're just photos of people on the street, and that's gotten quite popular. You know, and I look at photos on the street, let's say down here, and it doesn't look half as good as it does from, you know, somewhere in Tokyo, for example, like the fashions and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, if you go to Japan, you'll see them photographing people on the street. They're just standing on a street corner, and you could tell they're walking by, they're just like telling people, hey, can we photograph you for this magazine? So those are the things that we see. But here, it doesn't quite happen. So I think that's kind of one of the things you see. It's like the way it works, at least what I've seen. Maybe I'm in the right neighborhoods all the time, and I'm standing there when all the right people are walking by, but oh, yeah, that kind of stuff is just, it seems very natural. Like it's just very random. It's not set up. Any other questions? Or?
We're changing the schedule a little bit. I'm going to have Ryan go through some of the application case studies, and then we're going to have this interactive workshop. So I think his kind of like a presentation, but it's also an interactive presentation. It's going to be about 30 to 35 minutes, I think 45 minutes. And then we heard beer pop-off.
Yeah, hold off on the beer pop.
Yeah, and caffeine.